Hello, welcome to a brief Cubase tutorial on how to deal with multi-track drums when you have to deal with a tempo change request in a project. So, a couple of things to bear in mind. Cubase has a number of very good and effective algorithms for dealing with tempo changes or adjusting the tempo of events in the project window and making them match the project tempo. And there's various ways of dealing with this, and one of the things I wanted to focus on was dealing with drums, because the way you treat drums and the way you would treat, let's say, synths, piano and vocals, stuff like that, would be different. You would rely on different usages of different algorithms, because the algorithm is going to actually affect the quality of the sound, and I'll explain just shortly why this is something to be aware of. So for those who don't know, this is in Cubase. I have got here a kick sample which I've dragged in. Now what happened to me recently was that a client had sent me a multi-track mix, and obviously lots of those multi-tracks were drums, and one of those was a kick drum track. So before I show you what the issue was with that project, I want to first clarify something with regards to how samples function in the project window for Cubase. So to start with, I've dragged in a single kick drum sample. So here we are. This is the kick drum, and the tempo, as you can see down here, is 90 BPM. Okay, so I've put one kick drum on every beat of one bar, and everything seems to be lining up nicely, along with the metronome. You can hear clearly that everything is lovely. So if I change the tempo now, let's say I want to put in like 120, okay. The kick drum sample stays exactly the same, it just happens at a faster tempo, meaning that the positions of these samples have been shifted so that they remain on the grid, and therefore they are matched to the tempo, but the sound or quality of these samples has not been affected in any way. Okay? We are working in musical mode, so please be aware of that. That is a significant point that you should be aware of. We're not working in linear mode. We're working in musical, because musical means that things are going to be locked to the tempo of the project and not the timeline running alongside the project. Okay, if you look at the top bar here, we've got bars and beats, and then we also have minutes or samples, whatever you want to look at. But we're working with bars and beats, so we're sticking to musical mode for now. Okay, so I can adjust the tempo any which way I want. I can make it slower, I can make it faster, 100 BPM, and the sample stays exactly the same. The only thing that changes is the tempo. Now, to make this clearer, I'm going to duplicate this track, okay, and I'm going to turn this event here into a single long block of audio, okay, and you. Yes. Hey, you too. Right. Thank you. Okay, so the situation that occurred as follows. I had a single track that was all kick drum, like this. Now what happens is if you try to adjust the tempo when you have a single long audio event with kick drum in it, you end up with the following problem. When you adjust the tempo, okay, you will see that the samples, they start to move out of alignment with the project. And the other thing that happens is that the quality of the sound changes. Now, let's say for argument's sake, you put this sample, you put the audio event into musical mode, like this. And so now when you adjust the tempo, it will adjust the audio event accordingly to match the tempo. So beforehand, let's say we were at 100 BPM, right? So everything is exactly the same. Now, if I start to move the tempo to, let's say, 120, or let's say to 150, make it more extreme, okay? You can hear that the quality of the sound has changed. That's because the algorithm that has been applied to adjust for the tempo has time stretched the audio, or in this case, it's actually time squashed it. Now that can be very annoying, because what it means is that the quality of the audio is going to be affected. Now I can demonstrate this clearly by showing you if I just change the color of, let's say, this one here. So the top one is our original kick drum sample. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just invert the phase on the top kick drum sample. Okay, now if I play them both at their original tempo of 100 BPM now, and it'd be nice if I did this correctly. Right. You see, I inverted the phase on the wrong one. That's why. Okay, good. So the orange one has the phase inverted and the gray one is playing normally. Now if I play them both at the same time, we don't hear anything apart from the metronome. I'll turn that off. Silence. So which means that these two samples are identical sonically. So when they're inverted, when one of them is inverted, then the other one is cancelled out. So that's fine. And that means that they're both exactly the same. Now, if I start to adjust the tempo here, and I make it 101, we can immediately start to hear artifacts leaking through. And what we're hearing is now the difference in the sample, because the waveform has been changed by the algorithm, which is trying to compensate for the time adjustment. Now, it might not make such a difference if you're adjusting your tempo by 1 or 2 BPM. But if, let's say, you want to go from 100 to, 120 BPM, right? Well, suddenly your kick drum sample is going to sound a whole lot shorter, and the low end of the tail is going to sound different. And basically, the sound overall is going to be very different. Now, if I were to bounce this lower one to audio, you would see that there is actually a change in the waveform. If I go back again, you see that the waveform is different. So how do we get around this problem? Let's say I've got a big long audio event full of kick drums, and I want to adjust the tempo of the project now from 100 to 120, and I don't want it to mess up with the sound. So a few ways of doing that. One way is that you can just get the kick sample on its own and start copying and pasting it all back again into the project, which could take a long time. You could take just one sample of the kick drum here, and you could drop it into a sampler like Battery or Groove Agent or something, and then have a MIDI track to trigger it. All of those are definitely possibilities, but can be a little bit time consuming or annoying if you don't want to start running MIDI tracks in an audio project and vice versa. So what I thought of would be an ideal thing to do is as follows, is that you take your very long kick drum event, and then as long as the kick drum is falling within, let's say, falling on quarter notes, and it's going to be pretty much remaining like that the same way. You might, obviously, project depending, it depends on the project. Sometimes there might be kick drums that happen on the offbeats or kick drums that happen in different places. But in general, if it's like a 4 on the floor, simple kick drum layout, what you can do is you can just go to the scissors tool. You can hold down Alt, and on the grid line, in between, on beat number, well, it's 1.5. We're looking at eighth notes here. Hang on, let's go to quarter notes. Right, so if you change the grid to eighth notes, right, you hold down Alt and you slice the event over here, it will create cuts throughout the whole audio event at that same spot, which effectively allows you to then isolate individual kick drum samples. Right, so what you've done is you've created events out of a long event, and now you've got independent kick drum samples that are happening. Now you can go back to here, you can deselect the musical mode option here, because this is a very short sample now. And then what will happen is that when you adjust the tempo now, okay, from 100 to, let's say, 130, whatever, 135, the kick drum sample has stayed exactly the same. It hasn't been affected by time stretching. We can compare it to the phase inverted version. You can hear total silence. That means that these two samples are both identical. no damage has happened to the audio. And it means that you can then adjust the tempo as much as you want, and you won't lose the quality of the kick drum sample. And if you're worried about all the overlapping audio events, because you can see the blank spaces in between are kind of like overlapping, so you can just go here, you can highlight the event. If it's very long, if it's very, very long, let's say you have like, you know, a lot of it, and you don't have to select it all like that. So what you can do is you can right click on the track itself and do select all events, and then it will select everything on that track. And then you go to audio and you go to advanced, and then you can go to delete overlaps, and then that basically removes any overlapping silence. The silence is still there. There's probably a way you can get rid of the silent blocks using the logical editor or some other tools like detect silence, I guess, but that's not really the purpose of this tutorial. And so yeah, that is basically how you can adjust the tempo of a drum track without ruining the quality of the audio with time stretching. And I'll probably with things like loops or shakers or cymbals, you might want to approach it differently. With loops specifically, loops are different to deal with because you can't really chop up a loop into its independent sample sounds. So you can get away with using the time stretching algorithm for loops, provided you're not doing it too extreme, because the more extreme you go, the more artifacts you will induce. But for things like kick drums and snares and crash cymbals and basic individual sounds that you can pick out from, you know, from a single audio event, I recommend using this to ensure that the sample that you started with remains the same, even if you are changing the tempo of the project. So thanks very much. I hope you stick around for the next one. And yeah, send me any questions that you have, leave them down in the comments below, and catch you in the next one.